All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to 2022 and Mission Hospice's first author talk of the year. We're incredibly excited to ring in the new year by having Maryanne O'Hara here to join us. My name is Elijah, and I'm the Community Education Manager at Mission Hospice and Home Care. I see some familiar faces and names, so for those who have attended programs previously, welcome back. Thank you so much for joining us again. For those that are new, Mission Hospice and Home Care is a small but mighty nonprofit, and we serve San Mateo and Santa Clara counties. We are dedicated to helping people throughout the challenges of a terminal diagnosis. Working as a team, specially trained nurses, doctors, social workers, spiritual counselors, and volunteers address the physical, emotional, spiritual needs of our patients and our families. Tax-deductible donations from the community support our exceptional care and our educational programs such as this, and help us serve people regardless of medical coverage or their ability to pay. If anyone's interested in learning more about Mission Hospice, you could visit us at missionhospice.org. And it's with excitement that I introduce our speaker, author Maryanne O'Hara. Let me get her on spotlight too, so you could all see her here. Perfect. So Maryanne is the author most recently of Little Matches, which I have here in my hand for you all to see. And this is a memoir of light and grief. This was published by HarperCollins in April. So it's a very new book. Everyone should check it out. Little Matches is inspired by a blog that Maryanne kept while her daughter, Caitlin, who's on the cover here, was waiting for a lung transplant. Maryanne and Caitlin's story has been featured in the New York Times, Time Magazine, the Boston Globe, Psychology Today, and Little Matches is a People Magazine Book of the Week. Maryanne is also the author of Cascade, a novel, and many short stories. So once we kick it off and I pass over the stage, I will put Maryanne's link in the chat for anyone who wants to check out her work and hasn't yet had the chance. After serving as an end-of-life volunteer at care facilities in Boston and Pittsburgh, Maryanne trained as a certified end-of-life support coordinator through the University of Vermont. She lectures on topics including chronic illness, bereavement, and secular spirituality. In the Little Matches memoir, I was particularly struck by Maryanne's story because despite my own loss being very different than her circumstances, I found myself in Maryanne's words. Her book is truly, it truly has the power to transcend each of our individual experiences and connect all of us on a very human level through our love and through our loss. So Maryanne, before I pass you the mic, would it be okay if I read a short quote from your book?
Of course.
Perfect. And this was one of my favorites, although it was hard to choose. This is a quote on grief. I am a leaf caught in a current, and I have no control over that current. I spin within eddies, I drown and revive. And sometimes I float, eyes fixed on the sky. And with that, welcome Maryanne to the stage. I encourage anyone who has questions to leave them in the chat, and then we'll get to those at the end. And thank you, Maryanne. We'll do a round of silent claps as I exit the stage here.
Thank you so much. I am really honored to be here. Hospice is really important to me. End of life care, spirituality. It's also important. And I've created a little presentation to share with you all today. And I would love more than anything to be in a room with all of you and able to make eye contact. But because I can't, I am going to hide myself while I share. I have a lot of visuals and I put a lot of work into the presentation. So I'd like for you to just focus on the visuals and not my face. So I'm going to hide myself and I'm going to share my screen and go into the presentation. Everyone can see that okay?
We can see it perfectly.
Okay. So I'm going to talk to you today about surviving what we think we can't recover from and how we can find joy and meaning and purpose, even when life throws its worst at us. I'm going to talk about my beautiful daughter, Caitlin. This is a snapshot in time of who I used to be: wife, mother, author, We were celebrating the release of a novel I had just published. What you can't see in the photograph is the story that was happening underneath. At the time, I was firmly a writer of fiction, the made up. At my first writing workshop years ago, when the leader heard about my 2-year-old's life-threatening illness, he said, "You should be writing your pain." I had no interest in writing my pain. Fiction was a way to escape. Inside an invented situation with made-up people, I could forget for a little while Caitlin's health and how it could tick-tock from well to crisis mode overnight. When that clock stopped, when she died and the world went dark, I told myself I could survive only if I knew I would see her again. But how did I know that? Let me tell you a little bit about her. In the beginning, I was a very reluctant mother-to-be. I had grown up the oldest of 6 kids in a very chaotic household with way too much childcare left to me. I knew kids took away your freedom and I had no desire for my own. Then I married young and immediately, unexpectedly, I found myself pregnant. I was okay with it, although I did worry I might not bond with the baby. But the parenting books told me not to worry about that not everyone bonds right away. So I stopped worrying. I was young. I definitely didn't worry about whether the baby would be healthy. When she was born, they scooped her away and weighed her, and the whole time she screamed. She was still crying when the nurse placed her on my chest. I said, "Hi, Caitlin." She stopped crying and went very still, as if she were listening. "She knows who you are," said the nurse. She knew who I was. Like the miracle of that. I fell in love on the spot. It was immediate and it was forever. We were lucky. From the beginning, we clicked. We got along really well. And for the first 2 years of her life, she was like any kid, except she would get a lot of colds. Too many. They didn't make sense to me until finally a pneumonia at age 2 that landed her in the hospital led to a diagnosis. She had cystic fibrosis, an invisible genetic disease that predisposes people to serious infections that destroy the lungs over time. There were few treatments, no cure, just a very uncertain prognosis. She could live a long life, the doctor said, or she could be gone by Christmas. Whoops. They honestly didn't know. These are my journals from those days, and they are full of the details. The grief so heavy it hurt to breathe. The belief that we could not truly ever be happy again. This photo of me was taken right after her diagnosis at a kid's birthday party. I was in such pain, but you can't tell. So much of suffering is invisible. We are often alone with it. But we learn to adapt the way we humans do. We learn to live with the chronic uncertainty, the daily treatments, the unexpected emergencies. Very early on, I began to compartmentalize, to put CF in a box. I had a saying, "Let's not ruin today, worrying about tomorrow." Every day, we did everything humanly possible to keep Caitlin healthy, but if we weren't in crisis mode, we tuned CF out. Living with this perspective meant that Caitlin didn't define herself by her disease. And it meant that I was forced to live not in the past where I couldn't change a thing, and certainly not in the unpredictable future. I learned to hang out in the moment and to really think about what life was for in the first place and what it would mean to raise a child who would know that life is precarious and temporary. I wrestled with what to believe in during those years. I felt myself to be an agnostic with a lot of questions. Since childhood, I had had a singular thought in the back of my mind. We find ourselves here. We humans find ourselves alive with no explanation. Long ago, we emerged from our caves and turned so much of the natural world into everything that we now take for granted. But essentially, we are simple. We are cycle after cycle of creatures who are born, who live, and who die. That's an awareness that can be stark for anyone, never mind a child. So we made sure that Caitlin didn't feel alone and that we helped her lean into the magic of our brief human existence. We exposed her to art and books and music and travel, the good in this life. If she woke in the night coughing, I would say, let's see which stars are out tonight. We raised her to honor the good in all religions, to keep an open mind, and to always, always question what didn't resonate with her soul. I probably needn't have worried. Caitlin's North Star was always, instinctively, goodness. Even as the smallest kid, she was always kind in a way I was not when I was young, and I always marveled at that. Where had that goodness come from? In the fire that was there from the beginning. There was fire, thank goodness. She was a rebel and a champion of underdogs, and I was grateful to see that she had grit and the ability to face whatever she would need to face. So I got comfortable with CF. I began to feel like I had control over it. If I continued to take good care of her, do everything right, well, maybe she would be one of those CF people who grow old and don't struggle too much. Life in our little house began to feel warm and safe again. We went back to being the kinds of people that truly bad things could never happen to. And then disaster. She was 11 when a routine X-ray revealed that a bacteria was destroying the lower lobe of her left lung. Left unchecked, the bacteria would spread and ultimately kill her. The only way to try and save her was with a lobectomy, Frankenstein language, major surgery that would cut away the lobe and hopefully stop the spread. During the lead up to surgery, I could barely tolerate living inside my skin. All my control had been an illusion. I had to depend on a medical team to save her, and the outcome was very uncertain. When I was alone in my house, I did things like cling to door jambs and scream. I lay on the living room sofa, staring at the ceiling and sobbing. It was on that sofa, one bright winter morning, that I heard a voice, strong and quite clear, a low female voice off to my left. It said, "Have faith." I sat up and blinked and looked around at the furniture, the books, the windows, the doors. I knew I had heard that voice, but faith was a word I had always associated with religion, with beliefs imposed on a person by others. The voice stayed with me, and for many years I wondered if I had experienced what the neurologist Oliver Sacks called auditory hallucinations. He had declared them to be an ultimate safeguard built into the brain. The lobectomy was a cautious success, the surgeon pretty sure that he had cut away all the infected tissue. But post-op, her lung refused to heal. Months passed as she lay trapped in a hospital bed, attached to this suctioning device that kept a steady vacuum pressure on her lung to keep it inflated and help it heal. From her 9th floor room, she could see ball games at Fenway Park and one night, 4th of July fireworks. In my own journal, I wrote, "If she dies, I can kill myself." It felt like a plan, the only thing I could control. Sometimes I thought of the voice telling me to have faith, but how could I have faith? We were caught in a loop of hospital hell. Then one day, after 5 months, her surgeon walked into the room with this big thumbs up, and he said, "Caitlin, I can't explain it, but your lung has healed." So we returned to our lives, but living had become both more precious and more fraught. 6 months could go by uneventfully, but now we knew it could change overnight, and many times it did. Illnesses forced her to transfer from college in DC back home to Boston, and we learned to never bank on anything planned beyond today. But that was okay. Todays are really good. We all received a today this morning, and sometimes you just have to hold on to the miracle of that because it is not a given. Like so many people who live with serious health issues, Caitlin grew increasingly reflective. She wondered, what is my role in this lifetime? We talked a lot about these bigger issues. And she often joked that if she hadn't had CF, she might have been shallow, which was her modest way of pointing out that she didn't think she was special. It was just that having to face your mortality makes you look at life and the world with a much broader and deeper perspective. Writing to a school friend she reconnected with later in life, she talked about how tricky her 20s had been when she began needing oxygen to sleep or fly in an airplane or when she was sick. It wasn't so bad that I couldn't fake it and kind of live normally, she wrote, but I also couldn't strike out and do anything bold. It really was this constant picking and choosing of battles, fun, etc. To the outside world, she still looked completely healthy. She lived independently, had a design career, a serious boyfriend, but her lung function slowly declined. Normal lung function is like usually around 100%, and here she was at about 30%. During these years, she stumbled across the research into reincarnation that scholars at the University of Virginia have been doing for decades. What interested her most, she wrote, was the idea that we are here to learn lessons in this life, figure out what those lessons are, be good people, and evolve our souls. She began reading the philosophers more closely, especially interested in people who were, as she said, intelligent and intellectual, and yet still very religious. She kept Tolstoy's A Confession bedside and read it many times over the years, bolstered by his ultimate acceptance of the paradox of faith. We talked about the concept of surrender and how the moments when she felt most free, most okay with whatever was happening, and least anxious were those moments when she was able to let go. I tried to let go too, but I've learned that it's one thing to be the patient. It's another to sit bedside, the helpless witness who can't let go of hope and magical thinking. She applied to a Master of Philosophy program and came close to enrolling until she realized that it didn't make a whole lot of sense to do so when it was clear her health was in serious decline. These photos marked the last day she ever went out into the world without supplemental oxygen. Within hours of them being taken, she was in the ER, and she had reached the point that she needed a lung transplant. We entered into the limbo of waiting for a donor. For many reasons, we had to leave our home in Boston and move to Pittsburgh to wait for surgery. Having to move to another city where we knew no one indefinitely was tough, tougher than this smile of hers makes it look. Her little dog, Henry, was her constant companion, as was I, the primary caregiver she now needed 24/7. Her boyfriend and her dad flew in whenever they could. We hoped that transplant would happen within a few months. And we had every reason to hope that once she did receive her surgery, she would survive it. The word waiting sounds passive, but every single day of waiting for an organ donor, a candidate has to work hard to keep herself healthy and fit so she can survive the most major kind of surgery a human being can undergo, replacing your lungs. Think about it. Waiting takes a terrible toll, and organ donation is not a given. She was at the 2.5-year mark here and really struggling, in need of an exponential amount of the oxygen she had needed at the beginning of the wait. She needed help to walk, to shower. This December day would be the last time she would ever see her little guy, Henry, because in the end, everything that could go wrong did. She existed, and then she did not. We people take up space, and when we're gone, there is a void. There is no rudder in that void, no anchor, no sail, no purpose. You are alone in it. I didn't think I would be able to live. All the terrifying images of how life might be without her, everything I had managed to squeeze out of my head for years, had become reality, and reality was unbearable. The only thing that helped was writing on a blog I had kept during the wait in Pittsburgh. I wrote true things, unsentimental, honest. When I was writing, I didn't feel alone. I felt connected to other people and to Caitlin herself. I shared her writings and my own. I wrote about how all I could do really was flop from one surface to another and cry. That on the outside, I might have looked like I was functioning, but inside I knew I would happily die if it wasn't scary and hard to do. I wasn't all despair and gloom, not at all. I wrote about our lifelong friendship, about our love of travel, and how we had lived on laughter, that great release valve, especially in the hospital. And I wrote about all that reflecting we had done on the reason anyone was alive in the first place. Writing on the blog was a way of grieving out loud, grieving in a way that other people apparently wanted to hear. I received a lot of messages from strangers who said that reading my stories made them feel like they weren't alone and helped them cope. They asked me to write a book. In 9 months after her death, during a walk around Walden Pond, I realized that writing the personal was necessary. It made me feel like she was with me. And if it could help others, then I wanted to do it. I knew I wanted to write from smack inside the real of it. I needed to create a record. I wanted anyone reading it to understand how it was. And if they were going through something hard, to feel validated, to be able to say, yes, this is how it is, and to know they weren't alone. And for readers who weren't struggling, I knew Caitlin's story would uplift and inspire them. I was also conscious of the tendency of human memory to beatify a person in the years after death. So I didn't want to wait. I wanted to write Caitlin as she really was, write our story as it really had been. Who she was in real life was splendid enough. I wanted to share her wisdom, her humor, her example. I wanted to write a book that would keep every good thing about her alive. In the beginning stages, it felt impossible. It took me 2 months to write 10 pages. Then I began to set a timer and write for half an hour each day. The book became a book. It became my purpose for living. As I wrote, I became every human who has ever looked for answers to the big life questions inside of books and science and in the natural world. My writing became a recounting of my search. Where is she? Is she? Is there more to life than this life? Does my existence have any real purpose? Does anyone's? The thought of any part of Caitlin existing beyond the physical death of the body seemed desperate, wishful thinking. I knew what I was, a vulnerable, grieving mother who knew that there is an arc to the human life. It begins and it ends. But what happened was that I kept receiving what seemed to be signs. Hawks, in particular, began behaving in ways I had never witnessed, perching on the roof of my house to fly right over my head when I opened the door, veering so close to my windshield that I would have to jerk the wheel. Caitlin was 33, and I began seeing 33 and 333 everywhere on clocks when I looked at them, 33 minutes or 33 miles to every destination. Her Instagram account, 333 posts. Her Facebook, 1,333 friends. Her boyfriend's street address in Maine, 33, on and on. I reasoned that if you begin to look for things, you see them. You look for your husband's red jacket in an airport crowd, and your eyes see all the red there is to see. I was well aware that my antenna was up, ready to notice the slightest meaningful coincidence. I must be unconsciously looking for 333, I would tell myself, just as it whizzed past on a license plate, and sometimes even found a way to say hi. Synchronicities continued, visiting a tarot reader in LA and pulling the Ace of Cups, the card of love and renewal and rebirth, then walking directly into a tiny boutique across the street where a single t-shirt was for sale, folded to reveal the Ace of Cups imagery I had just held in my palm, and where a customer stood spelling out her name for the cashier, Caitlin. Synchronicities that I originally dismissed as coincidences or odd occurrences began to pile up to the point that I realized that discounting them was a bit myopic. And when I shared these stories on my blog, the most unlikely people would share back. The cat that dropped dead, literally, during a mother's funeral, and the random stranger who told the daughter, years later, "I'm supposed to tell you, your mother's fine. The cat's with her." Nurses who tend to the dying will tell you that end-of-life dreams and visions are part of the natural dying experience, always have been. The mother who says to her family gathered round, "You're going to think I'm crazy, but my sister's here." The way Steve Jobs looked past his loved ones and said, "Oh, wow, oh, wow, oh, wow." So many unlikely people shared stories and shared them with such relief that I was taking them seriously that I thought, there's more to all this than most people are talking about. So I began to read the science community's explorations of the source of consciousness. I braced myself, thinking there would be hard proof that consciousness could not survive the death of the body. Instead, I discovered that science calls consciousness the hard problem. What was clear was that many people throughout time have experienced unexplainable phenomena. 100 years ago, a man named Eden Philpotts wrote, "The universe is full of magical things, patiently waiting for our wits to grow sharper." So much of what we take for granted is made of discoveries that would have seemed completely fantastical, even frightening, not very long ago. Here's what I came to know. Synchronicities exist. Regardless of what you believe to be the source of synchronicities, the marvelous thing is they do exist, and they're fun. They're part of the magic of this life we find ourselves living. I'd like to share a quick one from my book. This is a view of Martha's Vineyard, one of Caitlin's favorite places. It was the summer after her passing, and I went by myself to the far end of the island, down this road, Lobsterville Road, which is the skinny stretch of pavement that you're seeing here. I wanted to reenact the last time Caitlin and I were on island, and we had driven all the way out there. It's nice, quiet. You don't usually see any other people. I decided to drive to the end, like I had with Caitlin that day, where the road stops at a boat ramp. I started talking to her in my head, saying things like, "What the heck? Where are you? Why can't I communicate with you if you're really out there?" But I knew why. Because she wasn't out there. She was gone. I would never see her again. "I loved you from the first minute," I said out loud, and I was crying by that point. "No one will ever call me mom again." I turned into the dead end area where the road stopped at the water. And there he was, a guy who was all by himself out there, carrying a burlap bag with 3 big red letters on its side, an acronym for something. 3 red letters that spelled mom. Synchronicities exist, and they can comfort you. As I wrote pages that I knew could make other people feel comforted, my sense of purpose strengthened. I felt so physically and mentally better that I came to really see that purpose in life is necessary and probably a prerequisite to joy and contentment. In those early days of writing Little Matches, Caitlin's boyfriend, Andrew, shared one of her emails with me. In it, she muses about life on Earth. "This place is like a ropes course for souls," she wrote, "a learning center. It never changes, and the collective body of humans can never sustain their progress too much, or else there is not enough to challenge the souls." I loved that analogy. It made sense to me. The evolution of the soul seems an explanation for life that makes sense of human suffering. It also supports the argument that humanity is essentially good. Best of all, it felt like a missive from the other side, a message from Caitlin. I'm still here. You're not alone. Nobody is. And she shared another message. Faith is a choice. A choice. I had never considered faith to be the kind of thing one chooses. But the more I thought about it, the more I saw that faith is the great paradox. It can only be a choice. I began gathering quotes of Caitlin's to uplift me and to share as stories in the book. Like the time I was fretting about my new novel and my sense that I hadn't done enough with my life. And Caitlin was like, oh, Mom, don't you get it? You think all this is important, but all that really matters is loving people and being kind. Those words on their own can look simplistic, but really, at the end of life, what else will really matter? During her final summer, 2 years into waiting, Caitlin shared a secret fear that her purpose here on this earth might be to die, to teach lessons to others. In the last message she ever sent out to loved ones from her hospital bed, she wrote, I want to reassure you, I don't take myself too seriously. I do take life seriously, though, I'll be honest, because it's a seriously wild business. It is a seriously wild business. She loved being alive. She didn't want to leave. But she also knew this, that we are all temporary. The gift of cystic fibrosis was that she never lost sight of her mortality. She had a wonderful life. We will always grieve Caitlin because we love her so much. Grief doesn't go away. It's part of the spectrum of love. But her good example is what keeps me going now. And it's why I'm sharing her story with my book. I really want to lighten the insistent solemnity around death in this country. Most of us possess a wonderful human ability to remember. It's a gift. All of us who love Caitlin, we talk about her, we cry, we laugh, we keep her close and feel her presence because faith is a choice. I can view life as random and often quite cruel, or I can choose to live as if there is more to life than this life, and that somehow, in a way that no one can explain or disprove, consciousness endures and meaning is a real thing. That we come to this life with some kind of rough map, with familiar guideposts along the way and wiggle room to make choices. Life itself is so magical that it's really not that much of a stretch to imagine that there is at least one other level higher than this particular reality of a lifespan on Earth. Here's something I want to leave you with. Regardless of what we believe or think we believe, it can be instructive to take a moment to just imagine it's true, that we chose these lives, planned these courses of events in order to challenge ourselves to grow. Can we look back on our lives and pick out which events tested us in such a way that we can be grateful for them? Figure out the challenges we might have set for ourselves? Maybe set our feet more solidly on the path that resonates with our soul. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maryanne, for sharing your story with us. I had to hold back tears a couple of times. First off, I want to say that you are incredibly strong, and the fact that you were able to share that with all of us. We're learning so much. I've got lessons jotted down that I learned from Caitlin. I'd love to kick off the questions and then open it up to the audience. You talked about in your book and right now, all of these incredible lessons that Caitlin taught you and taught her friends and every person she loved. I'm wondering, a lot of people who are grieving a big loss come to our programs. What is one lesson of Caitlin's that they could take away with them today?
Well, the biggest lesson that just pops into my head is something Caitlin would certainly agree with and something I know to be true. And that is the grief journey is different for everyone. Mm-hmm. And there's no right way to grieve. There's no wrong way to grieve. I think people hear that, but it's so true. And also that grief doesn't really go away. You just learn to live with it. And in a way, you're almost kind of grateful to it, because the amount of grief equals the amount of love that you have for a person. So one lesson that Caitlin did know was the concept of surrender. And I have certainly found that when I surrender to what I really can't change, I cope a lot better than when I try to fight what I can't change. And Caitlin felt that too, for sure.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I would love to open the floor up. If anyone has any questions, you could throw them in the chat. I'm happy to read them out loud. Otherwise, feel free to unmute yourself and you could share them live if anyone chooses to do so.
It's so funny because I can see people, and it's just so different when I really thought by this point we would be doing things in person. And I was just in Kenya for the month of December in Caitlin's honor, and I was able to do a book talk with a bunch of young adults, and I was able to do it in person, and it was just so heartening and wonderful. There's just nothing better than actually connecting with people. But I'm also grateful for the fact that we do have Zoom during a 2-year+ pandemic. Oh, Salt in My Soul. Yes. I'm just seeing Salt in My Soul pop up. Yes, it's Caitlin that Mallory writes about in the book. And yes, definitely. I write about Mallory in my book, and Diane Smith. And I write in my book about this coincidence that happened when I was working on Little Matches. I went to a little 10-person writing workshop in Positano, Italy. 10 people, 25 pages from each author. And I was reading everybody's submissions, and I got to W, the very last one, and it was Dr. David Weil, and I recognized his name. He had been Mallory's doctor at Stanford. And I texted Diane Smith and I said, "Is this your David?" And she said, "Yes, why?" And it turned, so, I mean, what are the chances of that? The two of us were in the same little writing workshop in Italy. And his book came out in May, mine came out in April. And the three of us have put together a wonderful talk using our 3 memoirs, using Mallory's memoir, Diane Speaks for Mallory, patient, parent, provider, a model of collaboration for how storytelling can really help improve healthcare. And we've been speaking at Grand Rounds programs around the country since last September. And it's going really well. I actually just got an actual hand-typed letter. Everybody emails these days. And I said to my husband yesterday, "Oh my gosh, a real letter." And it was this doctor in Virginia who just said, "I need to thank you for how moving that presentation that all 3 of you did was. We do need to hear these stories." So yes, I am in touch with Diane. She's a powerhouse. And Mallory is just a wonderful person. And there's a documentary that's coming out next week about Salt in My Soul, FYI.
Isabel, I see you have your hand up, so go ahead and unmute yourselves if you'd like to share.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Maryanne. Wonderful to see you again and to hear you. And I have a question about your writing process starting at 9 months. And I know you mentioned and touched upon this, but I am always curious of when people are ready to write, because I really do believe in the power of writing, and I do believe in the transformation that writing invites. And I'm curious how the process was in terms of the intensity of your grief and then just starting writing. It sounded like some people encouraged you, but what was your decision-making process of when you were ready to start writing?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, right after she passed, it was just really days later, and I would write posts because it was the only time I felt like I wasn't hysterical with grief, because in that way I was communicating. I felt like she was like beside me, and that felt good, but I didn't plan to do anything. I really had nothing in me for the longest time. But I have always been, I mean, for me, writing is what I do. my mother had this little book that I write about it in my book, that when my dog died when I was really little, like the thing I did was I wrote a little book about the dog and stapled it together. My mother put it in the Bible. Like, I've just always felt like writing is the way to process. So that works for me. But writing a book, writing something for public consumption, which is what it is a different animal than writing in your journal or writing blog posts. And that's work. And it was really hard in the beginning. And it took me 2 months to write 10 pages, but I committed to going to this workshop. And at one point I really didn't think I could do it. And I thought, well, I had been working on a novel. I thought I'll just send the pages of the novel instead. And then I was like, no, you have to do it. And I've just always had good discipline. So I can force myself to do things. I can also be very lazy, but I can force myself to do things. And I'm like weirdly anal. Like I keep these, like I do things like this. And like, I'll make index cards for each month. And once I'm finished writing, I'll circle the date, and I have that thing, like, I can't, if I don't circle the date, I just won't be able to live with myself. So I just circle the date every day. It helps. And whatever works. But it was different than writing fiction for sure. But it was good. It felt really good. And it's been great to talk about Caitlin and share her story, and also to just get feedback from people who've read the book, and it just makes it all worthwhile.
Thank you.
And I agree that the story that you wrote truly brings Caitlin to life. I almost feel like I know her even from the hours of audiobook that I listened to, your words, and the book that I was able to experience. And your imagery of her today, I think, really made her come to life even more. So I'm so thankful for all of the lessons she left behind for you and all of her friends, so that each of us can grow and benefit from each of those. And we do still have some time. Oh, keep going.
Well, I was just going to say that, Caitlin was just really like very fiery. And last week I was having all these dreams, and I felt like she was telling me, put some of my pictures on Instagram. I don't want to be the sad dead girl. Like, she wants to be part of the party, So she would very much love that her face is on the cover of a book, and that, there's the flamboyant side of her that would love all that, but there's also the side of her that was just like, had such a huge heart, that she would just love that she's connecting to people, and people feeling like they know her. That would make her feel so happy. So,
and I do have to share with everyone that I did wear cat earrings today in honor of Caitlin, which was one of her favorite animals. Yes, I was showing those to Maryanne before everyone else jumped on. And we do still have time. So if anybody else has any questions, you can put them in the chat and I'll read them aloud. You can raise your hand and I'll scroll through the screen here and look for hands.
Someone's asking about, Janet, hi. Someone's asking about the Salt in My Soul documentary. It's called, if you just Google Salt in My Soul documentary, you'll find it. It's being released next Monday, I believe.
Thank you.
The one thing that's so interesting, that young woman, Claire, who has the foundation, who died and has the foundation out in California, and Mallory, they have so much video of them speaking about their lives and about cystic fibrosis. And if there's one thing I really regret, is that we have very little video or recording of Caitlin beyond like nonsense, when we were like making jokes about the dog and being silly. And she never really wanted to share any of her cystic fibrosis life with the outside world at all. Like, even some of her close friends say after they read the book, I feel so terrible. I didn't realize how bad it was for her. And she said she didn't want you to know. But I really, when I see all the audio and video of these other young women that the families have, I wish we had done a little bit more about.
Can I just make a comment in response to that? It's Janet. I was gonna say this actually right as you were speaking about this, is that when, I'm sorry, I don't know your name because it just says Mission Hospice, but can you remind me your name once more? Elijah, that's right. Sorry. When Elijah was saying that, how much she felt like she knew Caitlin, I've said that to you a lot of, like, every time we've talked. I didn't know Caitlin when she was living in a physical body, but I have such a strong sense of who she is and how she continues to be existing in the world. And I just love, even though you're saying that you don't have video and that that's a regret you have, I love the way that you infuse the book with so many little vignettes of like a text that you guys exchange, like a text stream, or like a note that she put on the mirror, or what, like whatever, like little scraps of paper. And I love that you kept all those things, because sometimes we let those things like go by the wayside, but the fact that you could put your hands back on that and weave all of that like in her own voice through the story just made her that much more like vivid and present.
Yes, her
So-
voice is certainly there in her words, and I love that. And I can go through those old text streams, and the wonderful thing about them is that as soon as you start reading an old text stream, you feel like you're in it again. It really is kind of like a little way of time traveling. It's pretty nice.
I love that idea.
Yeah.
We did receive another question in the chat, so I'll read that out loud for you. It says, I have not read the book yet, but will you speak to making end-of-life plans before one dies? How to balance hope for the future with reality of the end could come at any time.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your willingness to share.
Of course. Thank you so much. So in the talk that we give to hospitals, I talk about this a lot because it's important to me. One thing I say is that for as comprehensive as Caitlin's transplant evaluation was, it took, of course, it took a week, the year we did it. We never talked about what would happen if transplant didn't happen. There was no plan beyond hope. And we all know that the medical world death is taboo. And I really believe that it's important, long before anyone needs to make end-of-life plans, to make a plan for the worst and then really hope for the best. And if you have a plan for the worst, then you can sort of breathe a sigh of relief and focus on making sure the worst doesn't happen, or hoping the worst doesn't happen. But you can sort of breathe a sigh of relief, because there's nothing worse than like worrying in the back of your mind about what might happen, but like pushing it away because you don't want to think about it and you're going to hope it's not going to happen. Because another thing I say, and I have a pretty sad picture of Caitlin right before she went into the MICU. You know, when you get to that stage where you have to make really important decisions and you're amped up on cortisol or adrenaline, or you're nearly unconscious the way Caitlin was, you can't make a good decision then. So I think that the medical community really has to help people make plans, and they have to speak honestly. We talk a lot about honest talk too, because you know, Caitlin's surgeon, not her CF doctor, but her surgeon was a wonderful, wonderful guy. But he would say things to me like, we're going to get you transplanted, Caitlin. I've got a good feeling about this weekend. And he meant well. But of course, he had no way of knowing, and it didn't happen. And so it's hard. And, you know, surgeons aren't psychologists. It's tricky, but I think that's why all this talking that we're doing, there was a study done at Northwestern's medical school where they hired actors to sit down with all the medical students and practice having hard conversations, what to say, what to do, and it benefited every single medical student. So
thank you for those tips, Maryanne. And I do have to add a little plug for Mission Hospice. We do have plenty of free programs that teach people, sit down with you right now virtually and walk you through some of that end-of-life planning. Again, those are entirely free. So if anybody needs that extra support, if they need help talking through how to have this conversation with their loved ones and their family members, we are 100% here for you. You can contact me directly. You can contact our organization. I'll make sure to put some of that information in the chat as well in case it's helpful. And I think we have time for one more question, unless Maryanne, you wanted to talk about anything in the last couple of minutes.
Well, I would like to talk about Caitlin's friend Jess, who she's in a few of those pictures there. And I mentioned that I was in Kenya for the month of December because it was the 5th anniversary of Caitlin's passing. And it seemed important to do something meaningful. And I write in the book about how while Caitlin was waiting for her transplant, her friend Jess, who lived in San Francisco and had run the half marathon, healthy as anything, texted Caitlin one day and said, oh, I ran the race, but there's a lump in my breast. And she was going to put it off till Christmas. And Caitlin was like, no, Jess, go to the hospital right now. And she had stage 3 breast cancer, and she's had a long road with it. And at Caitlin's, she's doing okay now, but she's on ongoing chemo. She has to see her oncology team every 12 weeks. So it's been a long road for Jess since 2016 when she had her surgery. And yet at Caitlin's funeral, she vowed to do something incredibly important in Caitlin's name. And at the time, she was going back and forth to Kenya a lot. She had developed a real love of Kenya and was helping get street kids into school. And Caitlin really wanted to be well enough after transplant to go to Kenya and see the big cats and see the sunrises and see it all. And so Jess in 2018 raised $200,000, bought land, and built a resource center for students in Kenya. And it opened in January of 2020, and they almost immediately had to pivot because of COVID. And she saw that there was such a need for a community health clinic there. So the Maryanne O'Hara Community Health Clinic is underway. It's opening in April. My husband and I were there in December, and we didn't plan to arrive on the actual anniversary day at the center, but we did. And it was just so wonderful and so emotional. And just to see the difference that Caitlin, Jess, that people can make. I mean, I wouldn't even know how to begin building buildings and clinics and buying ambulances in Kenya. And yet Jess has done it, and it's wonderful. And she's got all kinds of wonderful programs in place, a lot of mental health programs for young adults. I did a open talk about grief and depression in Little Matches during their monthly December meeting with the youth hub. So it was really heartening. Instead of it being super sad, it was wonderful. And we spent Christmas at this incredible camp and laughing about Caitlin and talking about Caitlin and feeling like she was with us. And, granted, and one other thing about writing the memoir, so many people said, oh, you can't write inside grief. I mean, I had writers say that to me, like really good writers. And I was like, I don't believe that. I don't believe when anyone says you can't do anything, well, no. And also, I know if I wrote a book about all of that now, it would be a totally different book. I needed to write from inside real-time grief, as I say. And I'm glad I did. It would be a totally different book. I don't think it would be as powerful.
And we're also very glad that you wrote from that place and didn't listen to the people who held you back from that experience. I know we're wrapping up. Maryanne, thank you so much for sharing your incredible stories and really bringing Caitlin to life for all of us. I see a lot of smiling faces, so I know there's some agreements going on, but I'm so appreciative of you just sharing such intimate experiences and allowing all of us to learn from all of those. And we will be sending an email out at the end of this program, so that'll have a link to Maryanne's website if anyone's interested in exploring all of the books that she's written and the blog that she referenced. There's some amazing resources on there. It'll also include a evaluation for anyone willing to give us some feedback on today's presentation. And thank you to everyone who attended today. Thank you again, Maryanne. I'm so appreciative of all of you being here today.
Thank you so much. It means the world to me to speak to you all, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Have a great day, everybody.
Okay.